And we are live.
Thank you. Good morning, or good, well, yeah, still morning. Welcome to everybody. Welcome to the latest Circle Shifting World of Work webinar. I'm Kevin Green. I am the chair of Circle's advisory board and the host for today's webinar. So welcome. We're pleased to have so many of you with us today. I'll introduce my three guests, which you can see at the top of your screen in a moment. But a couple of housekeeping things just to get everybody set up. Please ask questions as we proceed through the webinar. I'm really keen to make this as interactive as possible. You'll see in the chat box, if you just want to pop a question in there, say obviously who you are and who your question's for, I will pick that up and use that as part of the podcast or the webinar this morning. I'm really keen to make sure that at the end we have a little bit of time for any final questions. So if you've got perhaps a bigger question, a more strategic question, which may take a bit of answering, then please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to give us that question. And again, identify who you'd like it asked of. And tell us a little bit about your own experiences in your own organisation. So that's really a little bit about the housekeeping. I've got a couple of polls that we will launch. We'll launch one quite early on, just to find out what you're currently doing in relation to cultural development. And then one towards the end, which is more about how you're actually proceeding with it and what you're actually doing. So we'll try and get a little bit of data as we go. Let me introduce our three guests, three distinguished people, three people that have been involved with Circle before. First of all, we have Val Dow, who is the Global HR Operations Director for Agreco, a global business providing power solutions. Val, do you want to tell anybody about Agreco? It's one of those great unsung organizations that not many people know about, but does some remarkable things.
Yeah, so Agreco do modular temporary power and temperature control. So we do that in emerging markets where there might not be power, but we also provide rental power as well for things like Olympic Games and events like Glastonbury. So it's a bit of a mixed bag really, but we're in about 80 different countries. We've got about 6,500 employees. But we're spread quite thinly, so lots of countries, but there could only be one or two people in a country. So it's quite an interesting, challenging business to be in. Okay,
and up next, Alison Hodgson, VP People for Virgin Media Ireland. Alison's had a very distinguished career previously with Bank of America, McDonald's and Royal Mail. Alison, tell us a little bit about Virgin Media in Ireland, because it's slightly different than other parts of the group.
It is. So Virgin Media in Ireland, we provide broadband, mobile, telecoms, set-top TV boxes, and what makes us unique compared to the rest of the Liberty Global family is we have our own television stations here. So we have 4 VMTV broadcasting stations, and we produce our own content, our own local and live news, sports coverage, drama, and we've got equivalent to the viewing share of ITV here in Ireland. So it's a really interesting, varied business, part of the Liberty Global family, of course, one of the leading broadcast business and broadband businesses from America.
And quite different to the UK, because again, there's been a different structure in the UK. There's been a merger, hasn't there?
Well, it's going through the competition regulation at the moment, yeah.
Okay. And our third guest is John Amici, OBE, organisational psychologist, best-selling author, public speaker and coach, chartered scientist. But one of the facts that I'm interested in, and John said he's not quite as interested in that, is that the first Briton to have a very successful career in the NBA. And for those of you that don't know sport, that's basketball. And I'm just trying to remember, I know you played for Utah Jazz, Houston Rockets, and Orlando Magic, but welcome, John. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing recently.
Yep.
So I lead a weird and wonderful group of psychologists and behavioral scientists at APS, and we try and help people solve some of those big intractable problems that they have with culture and people and leadership and that type of things, from diagnosis all the way through to solutions. That's what we do.
Fantastic. Right, let's just talk a little bit about our subject matter today. So we're here to talk about cultural development. So I suppose it's always worth starting off with some kind of definition. And the definition that I've used is a set of predominant beliefs and mindsets that drive how things get done and how decisions are made in organizations. And I think, you know, for HR leaders, which this webinar is focused at, culture's always been important. You know, the evidence is very clear that great places to work, places where cultures are inclusive and people can give of their best, have higher productivity and stronger performance. So this isn't about being nice to people. This isn't about creating a nice environment. It's about doing this because it enables people to give of their best. It enables everyone to perform closer to their optimum. But in spite of COVID-19, you know, I think there's no doubt that cultures are changing, they're amending as a result of the pandemic. And I think one of the things that when I've been talking to HR directors recently, there's a sort of a debate about it sort of may be happening to us, and we really think we should be in front of this and articulating what we think our culture should be and doing some positive work in this space. And just to sort of bring it to life, I mean, 1 in 20 CEOs admitted in a recent survey, and you know, CEOs aren't renowned for admitting things, certainly publicly. And they said this, you know, 1 in 20 said that their culture hindered their response to the pandemic. So I think there's a sort of an awakening that this is hindering organizations as they try and adapt, respond, and become more agile in light of changing customer and staffing requirements. A study by KPMG, 95% of CEOs plan to increase their focus on leadership effectiveness, empathy, and emotion and care for their teams. Well, that means most CEOs are starting to do some work in this space. And 66% in the same survey also said they intend to increase investment in internal communications. And I suppose while we're in the middle of responding to the whole pandemic thing, we also had the tragic death of George Floyd in North America and the whole Black Lives Matter campaign, both in the States, but also in the UK and across Europe, which is again another thing where organizations have been very, very quick to publicly respond. But I wonder if they're really doing much about really diagnosing where they are. You know, from my perspective, boards, leadership teams, leadership populations, certainly in the UK, seem to still be very, very white and very, very male dominated. So again, now might be a moment of truth where we really start to think about how do we make our organizations more inclusive and more diverse. So a bit of an introduction about our broad subject matter. Let's start off with you, Alison. You know, what's going on in Virgin Media in Ireland in relation to culture, and has the pandemic and Black Lives Matters got you to think about things differently, or is it a continuum of what you were doing before?
Yeah, no, totally. It's given us the platform to actually accelerate what we were already thinking about. So, you know, in Virgin, we're very clear about our purpose. It's about building connections that really matter. That's clearly why we exist. We're very clear about what we do, which is providing leading edge services in broadband and telecoms and TV and content and broadcasting. And we're very clear about how we do it. We have our values that are well embedded and truly, you know, are lived and breathed every day. But what the pandemic gave us the opportunity to do was I always think about culture in the realm of show and tell. Like when you were at school, you had to do your show and tell. So it's both, the show is around role modeling and actually practicing what we all say, and then telling is actually putting it down and putting it out there and communicating it to our people. And we've called the Living Virgin Promise. And we've approached it in 4 different ways, from trust and empowerment, and that's really around Virgin Media trusts that I will get my work done, that it's okay for me to set boundaries, that I need to be mindful for the time around meetings and meeting etiquettes and breaks, but also that I will do my part in making use of the technology and adopting and adapting to what we all now have to do working remotely. The second area that we've approached it from is from accountability and collaboration, that I'm personally accountable for my work and my productivity, that I schedule my regular catch-ups with my manager, that I seek and provide feedback, and that I will be mindful of other people's circumstances, particularly given the times that we're living through. The third area is around well-being and health and safety, and just incorporating that into everything that we do, given that personal risk appetites are very different, and it's important not to project your own risk appetite onto people that you're working with. And the last area that we've approached it through is with flexibility, availability, and engagement. So I will be flexible and available for face-to-face meetings as and when we can go back into our offices safely. I will also maximise the technology and use the video function. We're very clear on that, and that I'll be available for team touch points and engaging and taking part. So it's we're showing by all doing that now, because we're still primarily working from home, although we have started to go back into our offices. But then we thought we needed to tell people as well, just to put it out there, so that it helped manage the ambiguity tolerance. And of course, the Black Lives Matter movement gave us the opportunity to actually collate what we do already in this space and decide how we're going to continue that. And for us, a lot of our work around this space is helping the local communities where we are. So we do a reading programme with local deprived schools here in Dublin to help children who don't get the opportunity to learn how to read. Our people go out there and spend hours each year sitting and teaching young kids how to read. We bring them to our TV studios and they get to present the weather forecast, and so it's quite fun, and that's just one of the ways in which we play our part here in Ireland.
And in terms of so some of those cultural statements were there. Has the pandemic and the Black Lives movement sort of got you to think about it differently? Are you articulating it differently? Are you trying to engage your staff in different ways? Are you asking more questions rather than telling them?
So the promise was actually pulled together, and the words that I read out there actually came from our own people. So we surveyed our own people and we said, there has been a lot of good out of the current times that we've been living through, and how do we bottle the good and make sure that we don't lose it as we move forward and into the new phase and the new world that we're all going to be living in. So that's what our people told us, that I will be accountable for my own work. I am responsible for my productivity. That came from our people, which was quite a nice shift. We'd always assumed that it was a two-way street and everybody was taking joint responsibility, but it was really quite nice to see the positive engagement and that people are prepared to both push and pull on this.
Okay. Val, tell us a bit about what you're doing in relation. You talked a bit about your organisation being very geographically dispersed, lots of people in lots of different countries, some countries with very few people. So how do you develop a culture that works for people globally and is consistent and applied? Or is there a lot of allowing different cultures to do things in a slightly different way? So tell us a bit about how you're doing work on that from a global perspective.
Yeah, that's a bit of a mixed bag, Kevin, to be fair. So we do have to recognise that there are different cultures across the various different countries and continents that we work in. And we should embrace that. We don't want to impose a culture that's very one-sided, like you say, very white British. So we do encourage that, but obviously you need to have inclusion and collaboration across the whole organisation, and therefore there needs to be some values and some behaviours that we need to work to in order to bring those out. So we, I guess, have just, as a result of the latest event, we've just kind of refocused our areas. So we have something called Value the Difference, and that's been going on since last year. We've got a value difference team, which is organised of various different people within the business at various different levels as well. So it's not just a HR team that's going off and doing their magic voodoo HR work. It's a group of everybody, and they're looking at things like shared commitments to inclusion and collaboration, rolling out a leadership framework, and that leadership framework is aimed at people leaders, at business leaders, and then what we are calling enterprise leaders. And then we're using that development framework to further embed and further enhance both the culture, but also the Value the Difference programs around diversity and inclusion. And then we're kind of developing a group of actions and an integrated roadmap that will promote the culture, but also promote the culture of inclusion and diversity and collaboration. So some of the things we're doing is not actually chasing targets, because we don't think that's the right thing to do, but more gather data, look for opportunities and best practice, and start to develop people into these more senior roles and grow a bit more from within, really. And then part of that is very much collaboration element of the culture that comes out, and making sure we intertwine that with sort of digital employee experiences and impact for the SLT.
Okay, so thanks for that. Both of you said quite a lot about what you're currently doing and how it fits in. I'm going to bring John in a moment, but one question to both of you. So if we look, say, 18 months in the future, all this work, this investment, this effort, defining values, driving it, improving communication, looking at leadership programs, how do you know whether it's made any difference? What are the outcomes you're looking for? So what would we see different in, let's start with you, Alison, in 18 months, 2 years time, if some of this stuff was really starting to get traction and was starting to move the organization in the direction? What would the quantifiables be?
So we're very clear, we know what good looks like in this space, and it's enhanced collaboration. So it is silo busting, it is where functions work across, not just up and down, and that we are continuing to innovate and collaborate across the whole organisation within Virgin Media Ireland, but also the Liberty Global family. And that's something, Kevin, you and I have worked in Virgin Media recently, and that is something that we're all very mindful of. And I suppose we all had really great ideas about how we were going to make it happen, and there's nothing like a lockdown to actually make it. So that, it has moved, I would say, since you were with us here in Dublin in January. There's a delivery, sorry about that.
The pleasure of Zoom, eh?
Yeah. It's transformed. It's completely transformed.
So it's already moving, and so what you'd see in 18 is more collaboration, more working on projects, getting things done in a different way, less silos. Okay, Val, tell us what you'd see. What would the difference be?
I was desperately trying to jump in there and say yes, because exactly the same. Because we've got these different cultures across different countries, because our natural culture in Agreco is customer is king, and it's quite entrepreneurial. But what that does do is it does make you very siloed, and makes you very focused on your area of the business and not looking holistically and being a little bit more collegiate. So that would definitely be a good positive for us in 18 months to 2 years. And I would just add to that the leadership are far more we've taken down the barriers and the taboo of what inclusion and diversity is. It's not, it shouldn't be number driven. It should be, the way it should be a natural behavior, not something that's forced. And I think if we can get to that bit, we're encouraging more flexible working, and we've got the collaboration tools and the training embedded, I think we'll be in a much better position. That's what I'd like to look for in 18 months' time.
Okay. So John, you do a lot of work in this area. Tell us a little bit about whether you think all of a sudden have corporates just got interested in this, or is it something that's an ongoing piece of work but now has been heightened? Do you think leaders are more interested in modifying and changing culture? So I'm really just interested in your take on what you see is going on. You talk to lots of FTSE 100 companies around the world. I'm just interested in your conversations with leaders about what they're saying about culture and why they're saying they want to do something different.
I think there's been a flurry of activity around culture. I think almost everybody I talk to talks about what they've already been doing. Although very, very many times, if you kind of mapped the resources, the time, the energy that was actually going into it, it has been a hockey stick, just in conjunction by happenstance, I'm sure, with COVID. Because culture is one of those things that people love to talk about, but it's a Princess Bride word. That's the problem with it, right? If you're familiar with The Princess Bride, there's this the guy who's the villain in it keeps on walking around going inconceivable, and eventually somebody looks at him and just says, you keep using that word, I don't think it means what you think it means. And so we call them Princess Bride words. And so culture, leadership, these types of things, they're Princess Bride words. They mean literally whatever you want them to mean. And when it comes to measurement, that's generally what we do with them. So I think, of course, rhetorically, people are interested in it. The behavioral integrity of that is not always there. When you actually look inside, and also people pick the bits that they want to talk about. So most organizations can look to their progress on gender and be at least somewhat warmed by some progress on gender, though by no means is this kind of ubiquitous, because it is only a certain sector of certain women who have managed to progress. But almost nobody talks about the fact that we are literally talking about Black people for the first time for the last 6 weeks. Is when we've done that. It is quite literally taken the murder of somebody in another country to get us to start this conversation. And for international companies, it can seem different, but we work with a lot of international companies, and they may have lots of indigenous people in those indigenous places. But then you look in the United Kingdom and America, and they have the same challenges as everybody else does when it comes to Black people, Black heritage people in the United Kingdom, or African Americans in America. I'm hoping that this will be sustained.
That was my question. So do you think this is an opportunity? Do you think people are seriously going to embrace trying to change their organizations? Or do you think that in a year's time, we'll go, yeah, we did some work, we created some more values, we've done some workshops, but strangely enough, our culture looks and feels pretty similar to what it did a year ago? If
the culture looks pretty similar to what it was a year ago, then I think you're dead in 5 years. It's just, it's not possible. There's no new normal. It's the dumbest concept out there. There is no new normal. The new normal lacks all ambition. One of my day jobs is I'm director of a hospital trust. It's the country's largest hospital trust. I get a briefing from the NHS every Monday. There's no new normal. The time now is to start thinking about what are officers for? Because for the most part, before this, officers were because we didn't trust our people to get the job done unless we were watching them. That's what they were for. And now we have to think perhaps they need to be places where we can really talk about, as Alison alluded to, that silo busting and really integrating groups of people. We're going to need to talk about having regional hubs so that people can work somewhere that's 10 miles from their house instead of commuting for 3 hours to come into central London. We're going to use them as centers for teaming, for developing new innovative ideas, all of this stuff, experiences, embedded experiences. If you just want a place that is for you to observe people because you don't trust them, these people will be working for Alison and Val. in the future. That's the answer. They're just not going to work for a company that thinks that obtusely.
So tell me a bit about what you think this does to frontline management and leadership. And I'll come back to you again last. So Alison, so for me, one of the fundamental shifts that organizations are trying to think about is, you know, we've known for years, let's be honest, HR has always felt our frontline managers aren't strong enough in relation to engaging our people, motivating them, providing feedback, developing people. But it's only recently I've seen people going, we think that's the key to success. And it's like, really? But we haven't been investing in them. We haven't been training them. We haven't been giving them the skills to have difficult conversations. So I'm interested in Virgin Media's take in Ireland on what you're going to do for frontline managers. Because in reality, you know, I don't know, your field engineers, the people that are out, reporters, the interface with the whoever is their coach, leader, whatever it may be, is obviously critical into providing a great employee experience where people can give it their best. So for you first, and then I'll ask you, Val, and then I'll come back to you, John.
You know, I would say that there are probably 3 or 4 times in my career that I have got really lucky. And one of them was in January of this year when I hired a new learning and development business partner. Kevin, you met her, Erica Ullman. She is outstanding. She came, and her first and only focus for the 2 months before lockdown hit was working with line managers, all of our line managers, of which we have many, on PDPs. How do you build a proper personal development plan? So she had spent 6 to 8 weeks on this with our line managers. As a result, everybody going into lockdown had a pretty comprehensive PDP. So then when she was moving into, and now a performance mindset involves you making a connection with your people, involves you helping your people rise to their challenges, involves you helping your people understand where their gaps are and helping point them towards resources that we have. I got lucky. I just got lucky. Erica joined. She was totally in that, and we were on it. So it was just accelerated. And because we're multi-site anyway, we were quite technology oriented. A lot of WebEx calls before lockdown happened. So, for me, that's really worked, and that's why I think that's why when our people wrote to us to say, I will be personally accountable for my work and productivity, I think that came from and was a direct result of the work that Erica had done on personal development planning with line managers, because it was a shift. It became a push rather than a pull.
Yeah, but was that just sort of a training intervention? Was it? I mean, they've always, presumably, your line managers were accountable for performance and feedback. So the new bit was you just started to show them that you meant it, or you invested some time in their development. What changed? What was the push?
One of the fundamental changes was, as soon as she came in, she scrapped our learning and development calendar.
Yeah.
Before that, we had a learning and development calendar, and in January it was going to be presentation skills, and in February it was going to be, you know, what, project management skills or whatever it might have been. She just scrapped that and said that gives no value to anybody, least of all our people.
Okay.
So that shift then from scrapping something that had always been done to then helping people understand, okay, so, you know, what is it that I need to do to be able to enjoy my work and do well at my work? So it became more of a conversation. So we weren't talking about how many people were turning up at the training courses anymore. We were talking about the what matters and the difference, and why it's why the learning and development calendar was so superfluous for so long, but we always did it because we always did it.
Okay. Quick one from you then, Val, a bit about sort of frontline managers as part of this. You know, what are you doing around that? And John, I'll let you comment on that. And then I'd like you to take you to one of the questions about that thing about culture being intangible, one of the questions we've had. Val, just tell us about what you're up to with frontline leaders and managers.
Yeah, well, culture's a very big play in this, isn't it? Because, you know, we all do these engagement surveys every year, and what's the first thing that comes out? Training and development. So we put on a load of courses for training and development, but we're doing the same thing, so we're getting the same answer. I don't think anybody's cracked that nut. If they do, please let me know. But I think one of the things that COVID has done in a positive way around this particular element is it's made managers have to engage far more and be far more communicative than they normally would have done, because people are remote. They are empathetic and they're more concerned about their team rather than them being in the office together, or them being on a site working on a project, on a power project together. They're having to engage in a very different way, and we've produced some guides and some support for them to do that. But I think that's had a very positive impact both on the culture and on also that manager, that frontline manager relationship. I mean, we did have one say, "Oh, can I have a list of all logons and times of logons?" And we had to sort of explain to him that that's not how working from home works. But that was a one-off, and it was very unique. By and large, people are more coaching, are behaving in a more coaching manner through the fact that we have to use Zoom and we can't be together, which has had a natural change on our culture for the positive. So,
I mean, Val, one of the things I'm interested in frontline managers is, the whole thing about well-being and caring for their people seems to be much more prevalent, much higher in the mix. Whereas lots of managers in lots of organizations were much more interested in getting the task done. Managing the technical thing. I'm in charge of this team. What we deliver every month is this, this, and this. And all of a sudden, the people stuff has just been actually how I care for my people, how I listen to what was what concerns them, how do we respond to that, has come to the fore. And all of a sudden, I think, some of the people management elements has become, more important than just getting the job done and doing what we've always done. Do you see that?
I do. I don't think it's because they didn't care before this came along. I think they did. It's just that their behavior and the way they manage their teams and the way they interacted with their teams is different in their minds to what it is now. If you're seeing someone on a daily basis, they think because you're having conversation with them, that's coaching them, that's supporting them, that's being there and managing them. Actually, when you have to do it remotely, it's a very different game. It feels very different, and you have to think definitely about asking them how they are, how they're feeling. Have they got any concerns? You don't do that if you're in the office with them or you're working with them on a day-to-day basis. You just take that for granted. So I think this is giving them different skills. And what I'm seeing coming out is more coaching skills, which I think is what managers don't have naturally and is what probably they need.
I think that is a really, really important point. I think we need to be really careful to say that everything that we did before the pandemic and before Black Lives Matter was rubbish. It wasn't. It was good. It was valued at the time, but the paradigm has shifted, and therefore we need to shift. And
it's a different emphasis.
Totally. And I think we just need to be so careful to, before the lockdown here in Ireland was the 13th of March, not everything before the 13th of March was rubbish. I mean, Kevin was over on the 24th of January.
Well, we wouldn't be in business, would we, if everything was completely rubbish beforehand? But I think it's just a different mindset and it's a different way of working. And I think, these things have given us an opportunity to reevaluate those and continuously improve them and shift the dynamic in a different way. Some of that I'd like to take the responsibility, and I'm sure the company would like to take the responsibility for. Some of it's just happened because it's happened.
Okay, John, your take on, in relation to frontline managers and leaders, what are people doing? What does good look like? Is it just embracing the opportunity where managers are faced with different opportunities, are having different conversations?
No, people don't learn new coaching skills because the modality of interaction changes. That is a fallacy. It is not real. It is not true. People do not learn how to be coaches because we are now looking at each other through a screen instead of looking at each other. Val's absolutely right that we take for granted that some kind of interactions will be more meaningful if we do it in person, and we may be a little more vigilant about those interactions when we are not in person. But in terms of what happened before lockdown, yes, a lot of what we did before lockdown was crap. A lot of it was. We have to face the facts. A lot of companies have done just fine on non-optimal systems and processes, and that's what we were doing. But if we look at, I took a quick glance. If we look at the companies here, their boards talk about, well, Greco's board talks about diversity in terms of women because there are no Black people in an organization that's in 80 countries on the board or in the executive. So let's be clear, for Black people who in the big four make up 0.4% of partners, I have to reliably inform you that what we've been doing for Black people has not been good. So what we've been doing for women has not been good. It's been non-intersectional growth for white women who from the middle classes who have gone to Russell Group universities. And that's ridiculous because I think there's some pretty bright women who didn't go to university and live in Wolverhampton. I just think that we can be a bit broader here. This is not to say we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I think we're missing a trick here by saying,
John,
we're missing a trick.
So what is the trick? What should businesses be doing now that they didn't do before in relation? Go on.
So why not look at what great could look like? But to do that, you have to understand why you were doing things first. We have big offices in the center of towns because it's convenient for wealthy leaders, because we think it's a sign of status, because we don't trust our employees if we're not watching them. Let's think with this new modality, how might we do this differently? Let's think, and I'm sure Val and Alison have already been doing this. Let's think, what new skills do we need to expect and demand and measure and reward our leaders for having? We have these values. They are well delineated. In some organizations, everybody knows them. In others, they are something they have to look up before they do appraisal. But if these exist, why not say, in order to be aligned with this, we are going to start saying, actually, these matter. So even if you have got a brilliant technical skill or your P&L is great or you know all the great networks, you can't work here if you don't align yourself with these values of collaboration and everything else. There's a huge amount that we could do here that isn't radical. It's simply saying maybe the tethers of tradition need to be examined for their contemporary value. And I think that's what we should be doing.
So tell me, some of the organizations you're working with, give us an illustration of someone that you think's just doing it really well, John, doing that diagnostic, asking themselves, what does great look like? And how do I come out of the environment that I've been in, and what do I need to do different? Perhaps just bring it to life for us.
Yeah, and not because Alison is on this call, but I've done some work with Virgin Media, and I have seen their work on belonging, and it does seem to be really congruent. They know, and the interesting part is that the organizations that are doing it great, they are really quick to say, this is the couple of things we're doing great, but, and then this is the stuff that we want to get great. Yeah. And that's the difference. You often see organizations that say, well, we're on Stonewall's this, we're on somebody else's list, we're on this power list over here. That's the ones are just trying to get by on. And so that's what I've been impressed by. And the fact that when I came in and I was rather disparaging about reverse mentoring, because I think there's a lot to disparage about reverse mentoring, they took it on board and were like, well, I'm not suggesting you should scrap it, but maybe we can make it more effective. And that's what organizations do. They say, I'm open-minded to feedback. Here's the research base. This is how you're telling us it could make our employee better for employees. Let's do it.
John, can I ask you, does it need to be, I agree with you in terms of it kind of has to be systemic and holistic and comprehensive, but does it have to be all of that all at the same time? Is it a big bang, or can you work towards it? Because for me, that sounds like, oh my God, I've got to boil the ocean and I have to boil it by Tuesday.
Yeah, we don't have to boil it by Tuesday. That's the good news. But there are some things we have to make decisions on early. For example, which big company with major offices in the centers of towns wants to be the last person to put their office on the market is the question that your CFOs need to be asking right now. Because if you occupy, 30 floors of a building in Canary Wharf, your questions need to start now about whether you really need that and how you want to use it. But that has implications for now our workers are working from home. How are we going to make sure that our leaders realize that that doesn't mean open access? The data tells us that people are now working much longer hours, and we need to make sure that we keep that under control, because productivity has risen not on the basis of more hours, but on the basis of being able to get work done in an environment where they're not being scrutinized every 5 seconds and interrupted every 3.
So I'm going to ask you a sort of question that came up from, I think it was Neil, one of our questions earlier on, was this thing about, the whole thing about culture can be intangible, can't it? How do you, so we need to articulate it as something different from we're doing some cultural development and a set of 5 values, and it has to be, let's take some action around these 3 or 4 things. So how do organizations going, and I think you're absolutely right, John, you have to pick stuff, don't you? You have to choose stuff that you're not great at, articulate it very clearly in normal language rather than perhaps HR speak, and then spend a lot of time talking to it. But again, I'm interested in your take on that. How do we avoid something where we end up with, loads of consultants from the top 4 wandering around doing a diagnostic, doing some surveys on it. We get a big long list of things we need to do that or that. We will talk about it, but it's so vague, so broad, we don't end up doing very much at all. So how do we get real? How do we pick 1 or 2 things quite quickly? How do we differentiate what we should do and what we shouldn't do?
I think most people don't have a great understanding. Most organizations that are in that kind of average but well-meaning space don't have a really great understanding of what individually benign policies, procedures, and ways of working are causing damage. They don't have a concept of that. So you do need to do some diagnostic work. You just don't need it to be a random survey. You need a valid, reliable survey that will give you thick, rich data that you can work with. Then there's the same prioritization job that executive committees seem to have no problem doing with almost everything else. But they want to throw to HR and say, fix all of this in 2 years. Yeah. Instead, let's apply the same process, because HR can do that. They can tell you which is the stuff we should do first, which is hot, which is high in risk. But also on the culture question, we need to stop thinking of it like it's intangible. I hear people say it's like smoke. It's like, that's just bollocks. Yeah. It is not like smoke. Culture is an amalgamation of decisions. People make choices, choices make culture. That's what culture is. A culture is defined by that, but not just by the preponderance. What are the most common decisions? They're actually defined by the worst decisions that we allow. That's what defines culture. I agree with that. So if we focus on the worst decisions we allow, rectify that, reward the behaviors that we want to see, and really analyze what they are, you can shift culture remarkably fast.
Okay, so Val, I didn't give you a chance to sort of respond. So, having thought about this, and again, one of the questions I suppose to Val and Alison is, are HR the right community to be driving this work? Because sometimes, I'm a big fan, but also our biggest critic, I suppose, as a profession, which is, we tend to do lots of well-meaning stuff, but sometimes not make a lot of difference. And if you think about HR, we still define policies. It's still about rules. We still try and, deliver things. It's all about consistency rather than perhaps holding up the mirror. So how do you think HR needs to go about doing different things to bring about more significant cultural change?
Yeah, so I think just to answer the first question, should it be led by HR? And that's a really interesting question, because you're right, we are driven by people, systems and processes. But all of those sometimes are fighting against each other. So we've got all the legislative requirements that we have to adhere to and make sure that we're working to, and that can constrain HR quite a bit. And is it our responsibility? Surely it's everybody's responsibility. It's not, and it's an organic kind of living thing, isn't it? A culture. You can't just like change a culture overnight. There's things that you have to unlearn and other things that you have to embed. So something like that takes time, but it's no good one department or one particular area trying to own that culture. It has to be an organic kind of living, breathing thing. And if it's not quite the culture you want. Like John says, you've got to kind of carrot and stick. You've got to pull out and not necessarily punish, but you've definitely got to pull out and flag those behaviours and those things that aren't indicative of your culture, and reward the ones that are. So I agree. I think we play a very major part in it, but I think it's a mistake to say that it's run and led by HR, because then it just becomes another policy, if you like.
Yeah. Okay, Alison, your take on that? What's our role as HR professionals in work on culture? What do we do?
Our role as HR people is to get out of the way of the business. We need to get out of their way so that they can get on and do what they're there to do. We need to be supporting them, underpinning them, enabling them, providing resources, somebody to turn to if they have to talk through situations. But our core action needs to be get out of the way of the business, get out of their way, and have everything there that they need in order to march on and be able to do what everybody needs them to do. But yeah, I think we are a part of the team. But for the most part, any program I do, probably most places I've worked in, I've been very keen to make sure that HR don't own it. We don't own it. No,
I think I've mentioned this before, Kevin. I think we absolutely have to be the business conscience and the business confidant as well.
Yes.
So, where things aren't going right and people aren't behaving correctly and the culture's not the way it should be, then they should be able to confide in us so that we can support them and help them. But, we also then need to play that double-edged sword of being the conscience as well. So we need to be, that's where I feel we play a better role, being the confidant and the conscious to the business. And as Alison said, get out of the way and let them do what they need to do.
I like the bit about getting out of the way, but again, there's a bit about, lots of organisations, and I'm sure John would say this, of just, we go through the motions sometimes around this stuff, Actually, if we're hitting our EBITDA numbers and the business is doing okay, do we need to change radically? Whereas I think there's a bit, is if we say that we are sub-optimising and we could do better, and actually look, I think one of the things John said is sort of resonated with me, because I've been doing a lot of reading around habits, about that unlearning. And there is something about really holding up the mirror, really challenging on one or two things about when we don't do it well. I think reinforcing where we do things well, where we are making progress, where we are making a change, but at the same time going, but actually there's some fundamental things that we need to do differently, and pushing that agenda. Go on, John.
Kevin, any high performance environment, that's what you do. You're very pleased when you've reached a level of expertise or competence that delivers in certain areas. And then instead of focusing on those areas, you look again and say, where could I get another incremental gain? And this is, the reason we know that the inclusion is not serious in most organizations is because it lives on their websites in ESG. It lives on their website in social conscience or contract or social justice. It doesn't live as a core element of the business. And I'm only interested in it as a performance prerogative. I want to win. And I would eschew absolutely no opportunity that would grant me a leg up on an opponent. I want to be a magnet for talent, not so I can pay my people less, but so that when people come here, they don't want to leave. Gen X, Gen Z, Millennial, whoever, I want them to come here and know that this is a place where they can grow, because we are an agile learning culture. And that does not take away from our productivity or ability to kick ass. Instead of a utilization culture where people are, as Val alluded to, asking, can I see whether they've been online or not? Because I trust my people, and that's what we have to do. Can I just say one thing about time? Because I think it's really important. We've been talking about, it does take time to change culture, but I just want to put a bit of context on this. And it isn't just the job of organizations, because this is societal too, but organizations are microcosms where there is uncommon control, where within your organization, you may not be able to change the laws of society, but in your organization, you can demand certain sets of behavior. And we have failed in this in some areas. It is 107 years since Emily Davidson was knocked over by the king's horse. And here we are without parity for gender. with some of the figures that we've seen for gender inequity and gender pay ridiculous. It is 1,800 years since the first Black people arrived in Britain with the bloody Romans. And here we are, 6 weeks on from a Black man being killed, and we already have people saying, it's time to stop talking about this. This is where we need to focus. There is so much that we have to worry about. I know that, but this is a performance prerogative. If we can get all the best brains, the people who are watching this should think of it this way. Look around your organization and think, is it possible that all the best brains look like this?
I like that, John. I like that. That's a good challenge. Alison, come on. What are you going to go back and do? What are you going to stir up at Virgin Media and Ireland?
No, you know, I tell you what, it's really made me sort of go, oh, right. Yeah, you know, I think there is a lot to think about. I'm very lucky to have a boss, a chief exec, who is not too self-congratulatory. So you might do something that lands well, and he'll go, very good. But you know what? If you'd got your act together in this part of it, it would have been better. So I'm very lucky to have that it keeps you wanting and needing and driving to do it better, even though it landed well, even though you had a great landing and all the passengers got off safely and all their luggage came with the flight. It would have been so much better if I'd served gin and tonics to everybody, for example. Yeah, you know, in all seriousness, I think I'm really going to go back and have a think about, you know, the belonging series that we do at Virgin Media is very powerful. And how do we sustain that? How do we sustain it in a way that still has credence and currency for our people? I think I'm going to, you know, look at what Val talked about in terms of not just always doing the way that what we've done and trying to reshape how we go about it. I think I have a lot to think about, so I can't answer you very cogently at all, Kevin. Sorry.
Okay, Val. So let me tell you. What about the thing about, you know, one of the great things that HR does have an opportunity to look at is hiring decisions and promotion decisions. Yeah. Now, I don't think we really look at that as robustly as we should. You know, do we just make decisions to, you know, the people that look pretty similar to the people that have done the job before, and George goes or Fiona goes, we're looking for another George or Fiona. Do we think about and challenge ourselves about what could someone different with a different skill set and a different mindset and a different view of the world do, you know, and how do we make decisions which are encouraging us to try things? You know, I think it's about trying to get organizations just to push the boundary and try a few things differently. But I think looking at data about hiring and promotions is, you know, an area where, you know, we must question ourselves more.
Yeah, so this will kind of answer the same question that you just answered, Alison, as well, because one of the things I've taken about that is I do think we need to stop talking about everything to do with diversity and inclusion, and we need to actually take action on it. And there's a big difference. So I'm not saying to stop talking about it and forget about it now and let's brush it under the carpet. But we can talk about it forever and still nothing will change, which is John's point. That's what we've been doing. So I think for me, what I'm going to take away, and I can add this into the recruitment piece that you're just talking about, is as well as that confidant and that conscience that I just spoke about, I'm going to be a disruptor. So what I'm going to do is deliberately go into my business and disrupt it. Start asking those same challenging questions that John's just asked us. Around you know, who's sitting at the table and are they the best minds at the table, or are we just doing what we've always done and getting the same answer? And we can do that in a recruitment area as well. So we can do that by you know, we all get job descriptions, we all get CVs, and we try and match the two together. Nobody really knows what the job's like or the culture's like and what we're really looking for. So is there other ways? And you know, Kevin, we spoke about this at the REC many times. Are there other ways we should be looking at recruiting? Let's disrupt the whole recruitment process. If we want to get different result, let's disrupt the whole recruitment process in order to do that. And be agile and be flexible. If that doesn't quite work that way, let's try and do something different. And stop being too rigid. You know, we've done it this way all the time, so let's keep doing that, and we'll never change.
And we also know interviews don't work, don't we? We know interviews don't work. We've known for 30 years. And how most selection decisions taken, let's interview the people in the same way. You know, often line manager driven, very little testing, very little really getting people to do parts of the job and see, you know, so there's huge opportunity. John, I'm just going to come to you and say, look, you've heard what we've just been talking about. Give us another take. Give us another challenging question that organizations need to ask themselves.
If we know, so I'm a big fan with my team and of telling them this. I always tell them, don't ask questions that we know the answer to, right? So it's really, we know, you just pointed out a litany of things that we know about poor process. And yet, we know this for appraisal systems. We do this and knowing that they don't work, knowing that the outcome will be more homogeny and no selection for the very best brains necessarily. It'll be total luck. Why do we do this? We do this in part because our ambition is to do enough to win enough to stay above scrutiny, whether it be from shareholders or stakeholders or from a line manager, rather than thinking, how do we absolutely decimate our opponents? How do we dominate? And that's a different thing. We do it because we've decided utilization cultures are more important than learning cultures. And make no bones about it. You can either be a utilization culture or you can be a learning culture. The moment you have a code that does not help you proceed, and that's a learning code, that tells you what kind of organization you're in. They'd rather give you credit for sitting in a meeting where you say nothing with a client than give you credit for sitting for 2 hours with your colleagues and learning a new skill. Incredible. So if we know all this stuff and we don't do it, we need to stop pretending that it's an accident. It's a convenience. When you look at a lot of what goes on in organizations, it is the pursuit of personal comfort over the pursuit of organizational performance. And I'd rather be uncomfortable and win.
Oh, love it. Oh, I've got a couple of questions. You know, one of the things here is talking about education programs and about learning. So what do we need to do? Alison and Val, I think we talked a lot about culture. We talked a bit about values. We talked about frontline managers. You know, what do we really need to do from a learning perspective? That I think the bit I've liked about John's conversation here is, you know, a real challenge from a diversity and inclusion perspective, but only on the basis that it helps us win. You know, so how do we link the agenda in relation to doing the right thing, but it will also make us a better performing organization? It'll help us make more money. You know, what do you think that is? So perhaps Alison and Val, and then we'll let John wrap it up.
For me, I think it starts with always asking the question, why are we doing this? And why are we doing it in this way? And if the answer is not to win, then should we really be doing it? And I suppose that will help people focus on what matters. It'll help people prioritize resources. And just because somebody leaves doesn't mean to say that we automatically backfill that job even, never mind with the same, you know, Kevin left, so I'm going to get another Kevin. You know, actually, does that work still need to happen? Did that work matter anyway? What would happen if we don't fill that job? Would we still operate and still deliver, you know, everything that we want to deliver and more? So for me, it's always going back to ask that question, why? And if the answer is not to win, then we don't do it.
Okay. Val?
Yeah, I share a similar view actually. I think it has to be, you know, where do we want to be? What is our strategy and how are we going to get there? So is it about new markets? Is it about new regions? Is it about new countries? Is it, you know, new products, new services? And then how, again, as John and Alison have both said, how are we going to get there? It goes back to that disruptive bit a bit that I just spoke about. So what are we going to do differently? to make us stand out, to make us be those winners, and to make sure that the organisation is fully on board with all of that, and is adopting the same culture, values, behaviours, whatever it is that are going to get us there. That there has to be that drive, that motivation, and that focus from everybody. And I think, again, I agree with John. The learning kind of leadership and the learning kind of organisation is the only way to stop you from doing the same things and getting the same results.
Okay. John, one of the questions we've got from Sunny is, do you think there's a willingness in organisations and a recognition that you need to share power in the broadest sense to bring people on and to create learning and a performance culture?
There's a lot in there, and so what I should say is that there are organizations where a preponderance of individual leaders feel that sense of important nurturing, bringing on new talent. They see as part of their success paradigm the ascension of other people around them, but that is not the most common or prevalent way that people think. We don't reward leaders for it generally. We look at it as an additional, almost side of desk job. The reason that we have to have mentoring and sponsorship programs is because a part of a leader's job is not being done. There you go. That tells you how well it's valued. So no, leadership, the thing that we have to remember is leaders are promise keepers. They may not always make the promises, but if we went on any website of any of the people on here, their website would make it very clear the experience that one could expect in that organization. Your manager will take an interest in your career. We want you to flourish and thrive. We're not interested in driving. We want you to drive your own career and be proactive. All of this stuff. We create that promise, and then leaders are bound to keep it. The problems that we face here are due to the fact that organizations realize that they can have a marketing department that sells one image whilst delivering a completely different experience when people arrive. But that is changing. That has changed. COVID has changed this. People now realize that workplaces can care about you as a person. And if they don't, it's because they choose not to. They realize that you can work remotely. And if your organization won't let you, it's because they don't trust you. The times are changing. People will get with it, or they will become like the dinosaurs, extinct.
Okay. I've got a quick little follow-up question for you, John, which is public sector. We talked a lot about winning, and about outperforming. And you're on a board of a NHS trust, and I think the country's been very proud of its NHS over the last 4 months, quite rightly. So what does winning look like for that type of organisation? Providing, I don't know, throughput, more people being treated more effectively. But I suppose some of it is just about whatever metrics you use to measure success. It doesn't really matter. You've just got to be the best that organisation can be in terms of, the metrics that are used to measure performance within an NHS trust.
Yeah, we've got some standard things that we have to measure, raw mortality and other things. But we also are asked to measure ourselves against other trusts of equal size. But fundamentally, we as a board, my trust, Manchester University Foundation Trust, we look at our patient response. How do patients feel? When you get better, you can leave a hospital getting better, feeling like this has been the worst experience you've had, or you can leave thinking this was the most uncomfortable experience that was done in the best way it possibly could, and that's our goal. We want to make it so that every person who works here only wants to be treated here. Every family member who ever walked through our doors thinks this is the only hospital where I want to be treated, even if I live in London. That's what we want. And if you think about that from a customer-centric perspective as well, who wouldn't want that?
Fantastic. Alison, Val, I'm going to come to you and ask for your final thoughts. Your one might be a takeaway from today's conversation, might be something that you've already done and you think worked in your organization. We had 100 odd people on here, HR leaders that are looking for insights about what they do to improve their own culture. Just as one thing I think actually sort of resonates from what you've done or what we spoke about today. Do you get first, Alison?
Yeah, I think for me, it's important that we bottle the good in terms of what we've learned during the pandemic. A lot of our culture transformation and change accelerated, and it's important that we don't just revert back to the way we did things before. So I need to make sure that we bottle the good. I need to go on a long drive and think about what John has said, and reflect. And I think I just need to make sure that it's always at the forefront of your mind that, you know, we need to do things because it matters, and because we want to win, and for no other reason.
Cool. Val, one thing from today or from your experiences, the things that you've done in Agreco, you think, actually, I want to make sure that other HR people think about that?
I think we've got to make it feel not so daunting. I'm not sure I've got the silver bullet answer to that, but I think we get scared of it all and it becomes too much and it becomes too daunting. So I think there's something in the reflections that I'll be taking away as to how to do that. I also like the analogy of the mirror, holding the mirror up to the organization, because when we hold a mirror up to ourselves, we don't look in the mirror and go, oh, my hair's lovely and my eyes are nice and I've got a lovely cheekbones and I've got this, and we pick in the faults, don't we? We look in the mirror at ourselves and all we do is think, oh God, look at that. Especially after being in lockdown for 3 months, we're probably picking more holes than normally. But so why would we go to the organization and hold a mirror up and just pick all the good things out? So that's a real takeaway from me, is to hold the mirror up and look at it as if I was looking at myself, because I would be picking faults like left, right and center. And be open and honest about them. I don't think there's any perfect organization. So, but our mantra must be to become that perfect organization. And we can only do that if we're genuine and open and honest.
Okay, John, final hint or tip from you. You know, it might be something that Alison and Val said, or from your experience of working with organizations. What's the one thing you'd say to HR leaders about what they need to be doing around cultural development?
18 months to 2 years is what I'd say. 18 months to 2 years. Over the next 18 months to 2 years, we're going to be in a recession and nobody will move anywhere, but everybody will be looking to see if the promises that have been made, that have been quite effusive through lockdown and through BLM, are fulfilled. And after that period, talent will wander. It won't be a war that you've lost. It will simply be an opportunity that you missed. 18 months.
Fantastic. To our listeners and the people that have been watching this webinar, I'm sorry I've dealt with some of your questions, but not all. We haven't get time to do the polls. I got carried away with the conversation with 3 great guests, so I've defeated myself in terms of the process and management of today's webinar. But I think there's been a really rich conversation, you know, and a challenging conversation. And if it just prompts one organization to go away and to hold up the mirror and to do something different, then we'll have achieved something significant this morning and on this webinar. So thank you for sticking with it. A couple of things. Myself and John are both talking at the Big Reset, which is an event that Circa will be running. It's a big virtual event in October. So please book your place on that. The Circle platform continues to be free. So I encourage you, if you're not currently a member, to become a member and to use the resources. There's a lot of stuff on our platform. There's lots of webinars. Val did a fantastic podcast not long ago. We've got 30, 40 podcasts with HR leaders. So please take the opportunity, participate in the platform and book your place at the Big Reset. To John, to Val and Alison, thank you for being part of this webinar today. I think it's been great, and I can see from just a flurry of activity in terms of what people are saying that people have enjoyed it and got a lot from it. So thank you for spending the time with us this morning. See you again soon.
Thank you. Panelists, please stay online, and all the attendees, thanks a lot for joining us. If you could please log out. We hope to see you all at an event soon.
There's still a few logged in, I'm afraid.
Still a few.
Thanks, guys. If you could.
Yeah, I'm removing some too, so give me a few seconds. Here we go.
I won't take much longer of your time. It's just quick bit of feedback, guys. What worked, what didn't. Anything we could do differently. Just a quick bit of reflection and learning. And we'll do it in a normal time. We're nearly there. Keep going, Robin. You're doing a fantastic job. We're down to 6.
There we go. I think that's everyone clicked out.
We're still live on YouTube.
We are.
Good spot, Alison.
Yeah.
Good spot. Just as I said, and we'd have gone all.
We are no.